Hi, I'm Jay Fletcher, Cobb Master Gardener, and I'm going to be the presenter for Pruning in the Home Landscape. I hope you enjoy it. Um, I recommend that you get a piece of paper, something to write with, make some notes. The way this program is put together, you can also stop it, take a photograph of a slide. Um, you can do this at your own pace. That's what I love about this technology. We're going to get involved with some pruning techniques. We're going to talk about different types of tools that you'll need, and I hope you enjoy it. To tell you a little about myself, I am a photographer since the age of 16. Um, got it involved in high school, and I still am a professional photographer today. And I also design gardens. I think those both go hand in hand as far as a creative outlet, and I really enjoy the gardening because of that. And probably you do as well. Stress reliever, creative outlet, all the above. So let's just have fun today, and thank you for joining us. These are some of the items we're going to be discussing today. But before we get into this, I'd like to show you some images of really good landscaping design and also really poor landscaping design. This will help you understand the need for pruning and possibly not the need for pruning. So let's get started. What a beautiful, beautiful tree. The Monterey cypress. But look how it's opened up in the middle to allow for air circulation. You're going to hear me talk about this a lot today. The right tree in the right location. And this is the perfect tree in the perfect location. What a wonderful design. I am going to go out on the limb and say this requires very little pruning. Upkeep, yes, but it's just again, the right plant in the right location. It's just stunning. Again, look how this tree has been opened up to allow air circulation to get into the middle. That is vital for plant health. Selective pruning, this is a thinning technique. We're going to talk about this a lot today. This is my favorite way to prune. Look at the Sasanko camellia on the left and the redbud and the crepe myrtle. They all have something in common, and it's opening up. Just think about flowers in a vase. That's the way nature. Um, that's the way nature is. It looks beautiful. The star jasmine or Confederate jasmine is one of my favorite plants, but it requires constant pruning or it will grow in your kitchen and sit down at the table with you. Um, Probably 3 to 5 times during the growing season, but it's a beautiful plant to have on an arbor. These are two types of formal pruning. The one on the left I consider more formal for a hardscape design rather than plants. The one on the right is the boxwoods, your typical, very formal English cottage type of garden. That boxwood is going to require more pruning to keep it looking neat and tidy. The Leyland cypress, in my opinion, has gotten a bad rap because people are planting them too close together. We want to hide our neighbors. Well, this tree by itself makes a very nice tree, but they need to be planted far enough apart, or you end up with the image on the right. There's no sunlight that gets to the trees on the bottom, and therefore they die. And you have a very expensive landscaping bill to take these out and replant. Just be careful with this tree and don't plant them too close together. I recommend at least 12 to 15 feet apart. This is a really beautiful design. The tree in front, I'm not sure what it is, but it's been limbed up, and we're going to talk about that technique, taking the lower branches off so you can walk through and underneath. Well, what is there to say about crepe myrtle? The image on the left is what you see a lot of in the commercial landscapes today, and it's really a shame. Uh, the properly pruned image on the right is the technique of thinning. These are Natchez crepe myrtles on the right. They're trees. They are not meant to be kept at 8 to 12 feet. Crepe myrtles, there's many varieties of crepe myrtles. Some grow 40 feet like the Natchez crepe myrtles. Some grow 8 feet. Make sure you pick the right variety for the right location, and you won't have to murder the plant. The Yoshino cryptomeria is one of my favorite trees, but there again, the right location for the right tree. I don't think the homeowner realized how big this was going to become, so therefore they don't want to take it down, but they keep pruning it around the house. Yoshino cryptomeria is a beautiful conifer. It can grow 60 feet tall, 25 to 30 feet wide. But what an outstanding tree. Sometimes we just don't know what to do with a tree and we leave it alone, but this could really cause some damage for the roots getting under your driveway. So if you do happen to be doing some landscaping, be cautious of the trees that you put close to your home. It can really lead to costly repairs. There again, the power lines are in the, I wanted to say the power lines are in the way, but the tree is actually in the way. Uh, it's the wrong tree. The power companies are trying to protect our homes so we have safe power. This tree should be removed, in my opinion. This next slide that you're going to see is pretty typical of Marietta, Atlanta, Denver, any suburbia. You have a builder that does not know anything about landscaping, so they put the wrong foundation plants in. And why is that a problem? Because it costs homeowners money in constant upkeep. So I'm going to show you this slide, and you'll probably say, well, Jay, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'll explain to you exactly what is wrong with it. Okay, let's talk about these plants. Um, for those of you who know what hollies are, these are, I can't tell the variety, they could be Nellie Stevens or some other variety. Uh, this was your typical builder tree to put foundation planting around their homes. They didn't realize how big these trees become. A Nellie R. Stevens is going to grow 40 to 50 feet tall. So what happens here is that the landscaper is forced to keep pruning these on a twice yearly basis. And this is what I call meatballs. These trees should be removed and something else should be put in their place. You'll see this landscaping design all over the country, especially in big cities like Atlanta, um, suburbia, Denver. It's builders are not landscapers. So just be careful with the type of selection. Do your homework. While this might look good now, it's going to be overgrown very soon. The trees are planted too close to the home. There's really not a good sense of how this is going to look in 10 years, but I can tell you it will be completely overgrown. Wrong plant, wrong location. So let's get into the purpose of pruning. This is where you might want to take some notes or take a photograph of the slide. So even though you've got the right tree in the right location, Jay, they do require some pruning. I'm not saying they don't, but you can train or direct the growth, control the size, improve the overall quality, and we're going to get into that now. All right, the first T of pruning is the tools. You need to have the proper tool to do the job. It's kind of like an auto mechanic. You know, I don't work on my cars, but I don't have the tools. It's not really my thing. But I do work in my garden, and I've probably got every tool that's mentioned here because each one of them has a purpose. The hand pruners I use every day, I think I've got 4 or 5 pair of them. I keep one in my truck, one in my car. They are really nice to prune roses, really small things up to a 1/2 inch in diameter. It's the staple of pruning. One of the first things you need to have. The second tool I use a lot and highly recommend is the lopping shears. These are for larger branches, 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, sometimes even thicker than that. The photograph that's shown here is a good idea of what lopping shears are, and some of them, the more advanced ones, have a ratcheting system on it that is really good if you're not that strong. And even if you are strong, it helps you maintain your wrist and you won't have injury. This is also a must, the pruning saw. All these tools that we're going over have a certain need. This branch or this tool will cut branches 1 inch, 1.5 inches, or even I use this for many types of branches that are larger. The pole pruners, I've had many varieties of these. The one on the right I particularly like because you can see the system there. It goes into these pins and it holds the pole with a certain strength, whereas the one that's on the left, the green one, you have to hand tighten and sometimes they'll slip. But this is for the DIY landscaper at home that really wants to reach larger branches or even smaller branches up top to 10, 15, even 20 feet high. The head shears, either manual or gas powered or electric, this is going to be for what we call heading. If you want to have that formal look for boxwoods and some other types of hollies, compacta hollies especially. I'm not going to talk too much about the care and cleaning of your pruners, but it is important to get the sap to clean these on a routine basis so you can protect your investment. There's many ways to clean and care for pruners. You can hand sharpen these as well if you have the certain technique, which I'm not going to get into today, but just keep your tools clean right after your use. Get all the mud and debris off of them. All right, let's talk about the second T of pruning, which is the technique. We're going to get a little technical here. So just look at the photograph, A, B, and C. Let's talk about C first. That's the main trunk of, let's say, a tree. And B, you've got your new growth where you cut that off. And then A, that's the terminal bud. So when you remove the terminal bud and you take off, let's say 6 to 8 inches, then new growth is going to happen within that cut. So this is just a very simple idea of how to prune and where to prune. We're going to get more involved in this in just a minute. All right, so you're making the cut, and this might seem too technical, but there's a reason why you want to have it on a 45-degree angle. You see in the image on the left, the 45-degree angle, the top image, top left corner, is the way to make your cut, because water will roll off and it will roll away from the terminal bud. So the terminal bud will not rot. So this is the perfect way to make a prune or a cut. All right, let's talk about the 3-cut method for larger branches and why you want to do that. All right. The image on the left is when you want to take off the main branch. So look at your first cut, which is a notch, your second cut, and then your third cut. Now, you're asking, okay, Jay, why do we do this? You do this so you will not damage the tree for the weight of the larger limbs. It will, if you make just look at the third cut. If you make the third cut your first cut, then the weight of that tree is going to, when you cut it, it's going to damage and tear the tree. Now let's look at item B. Let's say you want to take off a limb. If you make your third cut, your first cut, then it's going to damage that collar and tear the main trunk, and insects and so forth will get in it. So your first cut is the notch underneath. Your second cut removes that limb, and then the third cut takes off the stub. So you do that to remove the weight, and it's a much safer way. So here's the types of pruning we talked about. I've already told you I really like the thinning technique. I'm not too much into the heading, but there are some times that you need to do that, which I'll show you in just a minute. So the image on the left is the thinning. You're taking out the branches inside, so opening it up so air and light can get in. If you want to head back something, that is more of your shearing technique, that's fine. You'll just need to keep up with that on a routine base to have a more formal look. Here's a good idea of a picture for heading. This is a formal, I can't really tell what type of plant that is, but this is very common in the residential landscape as well as the commercial landscape. And here's an idea of thinning. Remember the flowers in a vase. I just think it looks more natural. And here's just talk briefly about a drop crotch cut and why you would do that. You just remove the main branch, cut back to a large lateral branch, and then use the method in the previous slide I just mentioned. Isn't that a beautiful crepe myrtle, how it's been pruned? You can see the before and after, how we're thinning, opening up the middle. We do that to get sunlight and air circulation, and it's a very healthy way to prune. Oh boy, if this was in one of my clients' gardens, I would prune this to the ground, take the stump out, and plant something else. There's no way this tree is going to come back. It's always going to look unsightly. Now, renewal pruning, I just did this in my garden I think it was last spring, early February. I had some overgrown boxwoods, and I also had some abelia that were getting way too big, and I just cut them straight down to the ground. Not every plant will do well from renewal pruning, but sometimes you just need to start over. Okay, the third T of pruning is time. Prune spring flowering plants after they bloom. Prune summer flowering plants during dormant winter season. And we're going to get more into that right now. So what is a spring flowering plant? Well, you've got the azalea, which blooms mostly in April. The big leaf hydrangeas, the dogwoods, the clematises, and some clematises bloom in the summer as well. So you want to prune your spring flowering plants after they bloom so they can set the bud for the next following spring. If you wait too long, then you're going to cut the bud off and you won't have flowers next year. Here's some other ideas of some spring flowering plants. All beautiful. If you do not have an oak leaf hydrangea in your garden, you need to make room for it. That's the bottom picture there. And I've got two of them in my garden. They're about, 10 or 12 feet tall, probably that much, maybe 8 or 10 feet wide. But they're just stunning plants. It's one of my favorites. Here's some common flowering trees. You prune before spring growth begins. All right, so these trees are going to flower later in the year. The crepe myrtles in the summer, the beautyberries. So you prune those before the spring growth begins. Mainly, we're talking February, March in Atlanta area. The abelias, nandinas, sweet shrub, just different ideas. The abelia here on the left, that's one plant that you can rejuvenate. Remember, we just talked about rejuvenating a type of pruning. You can take that plant a foot down to the ground and it will come back beautifully. I've got several. I need to do that at my home. Deciduous shade and flowering trees. You want to work with these trees early in their life. You want to train them early. One central trunk, 5 to 8 strong lateral branches. You want to keep these, look how beautiful that is. It's, there again, flowers in a vase. It looks just like it, doesn't it? Kind of hard to tell in this picture, but the one on the left is the same plant as the one on the right, but it's been pruned. While somewhat subtle, it has been opened up drastically. Some annual pruning is always good, you know, to prune the branches. You see the one on the right that it's a dead lateral branch that needs to be removed. Just annual cleanup. It's always good to walk around your garden and enjoy a cup of coffee and just see what needs to be worked on. Just make a note, take a pad with you, and just have fun, enjoy it. These are called water sprouts, and if you have a chase tree or a vitex tree, which I have several, they are susceptible to these water sprouts, and they're just unsightly. They grow straight up. They need to be removed. They don't look good if you keep them on your trees. Okay, let's take a look at this just a minute. Pruning deciduous shade and flowering trees. So let's just start with A. You see that at the bottom. These are called suckers. These are below the ground. They come from the roots. They need to be removed. B are your low-growing branches that interfere with maintenance. They might interfere with your lawnmower. They might interfere with you pulling weeds underneath it. And there's C, there's your water sprouts. Those need to be removed. And let's take a look at D. Anything that's growing inward or rubbing against other branches, they need to be removed as well. If you'll just, I know I say this a lot, just picture flowers in a vase or a vase. You can do your own pruning. It's just not that difficult. And then E, branches that compete with the central leader for dominance. So you just want to make sure you've got that central leader. You don't have 2 or 3 central leaders. Take a picture of this slide or go back to it and make some notes on it. You'll remember the photograph that I showed you with the Nellie Stevens hollies and the meatballs. Those were broadleaf evergreens. And I told you they were planted in the wrong spot. Well, if they're planted in the correct spot, they don't need pruning whatsoever. It's just a very natural, if you let them grow, it's just a very natural habit. You just don't need to prune those if they're planted in the right location. The magnolias, you might need to take off some lower limbs because depending on what type of variety of magnolia, they get rather big. Give them room. Don't plant them close to the house. Let's talk about shrubs just a minute. Deciduous and broadleaf evergreens, the gumpo azaleas, those are the small azaleas, the Japanese boxwoods. If you want to shear these, which is the heading, it does encourage dense outer canopy and sparse foliage inside. I'm not like I said, I'm not a fan, but if you are, that's fine. It's nothing wrong with it. Here's some other ideas of the camellias, the Sasanqua camellias. That's one plant, the lower right-hand corner. I've got some Sasanquas that are probably 15 feet tall, and then I've got some other ones that I keep rather short. Um, it's kind of like Bob Ross, the old painter. This is your little world. You can do whatever you like. Try not to just try to mimic what is done in nature. Now, let's talk about the azaleas just a minute. You prune after blooming. Remember, they bloom in the springtime. No pruning after mid-July, and use hand pruners. Don't just go in there with electrical equipment and take off the top. Keep them natural looking. You want to thin versus shear. Now, if you do like the hedge look, and I think maybe one of the reasons I don't care for it is because I don't want to do the work. I do respect somebody who can keep that up, but it is a lot of pruning to keep a formal hedge. You see the picture on the right. That is, it says correct and incorrect. The image on the right, but the where it says correct pruning, that is because you want the base wider than the top so you can get sunlight. The incorrect method is the base is thinner than the top. You're not going to get sunlight there, and it's going to end up, the plant's going to end up suffering. It may not die, but it's going to end up looking very poor. These conifers, remember the Yoshino cryptomeria I talked about, they don't require much pruning unless you want to limb them up so you can walk underneath it. I've got several in my garden that I have done just that. I didn't realize just how big those trees got when I planted them in 2001, but now they're quite large and I just love them, but I had to limb them up so I could walk underneath it. The conifers, such as junipers, they don't require a whole lot of pruning unless you want to keep them off the sidewalk, or you keep them over a stone wall or something like that. Just don't severely prune more than half the foliage or it might suffer. All right, let's talk about vines and ground covers just a minute. Um, I've got several varieties of clematises, and I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but you do need to know the type of clematis that you have, whether it's a 1, 2, or 3. They bloom differently, and they do require different pruning. Some you need to prune in the fall, some you need to prune in the spring. And why is that? Because they bloom different times. Some bloom in the spring, some bloom in the fall. So if they bloom in the spring, remember when you should you prune those. All the spring flowering plants you always prune after they bloom. There's really not a need to prune a lot of ground covers. The Pachysandra in the lower right-hand corner requires very little pruning. You know, if you have some winter damage or something like that, it's understandable. All right, let's talk about hydrangeas just a second. There are 4 or 5 types of hydrangeas. I believe there's 5, and I'm not going to get into detail about that a whole lot, but I will show you the varieties. When should I prune a hydrangea? Well, the answer is you don't have to. If you don't know the type of hydrangea, you just leave it alone, and it will bloom. You need to know whether it blooms on old or new wood. So we're going to look at some examples on this. And this gets back to when it blooms. Does it bloom in the spring or does it bloom in the summer? So the image that you're looking at is a smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens. They bloom on old wood, which means you're going to prune that just like an azalea right after they bloom. All right, here's the mophead Hydrangea macrophylla. This is one of the most common, very popular. It blooms on old wood, so you prune after the flowers bloom. There's many varieties of this. Just know when it blooms. Then you can do your pruning accordingly. Here's a lace cap Hydrangea macrophylla lace cap, not the big mop head. It still blooms on old wood, which means it blooms in the spring. Here's the oak leaf I was telling you about, the Hydrangea quisquifolia. This also blooms on old wood, which means it blooms in the spring. So you would prune this after it blooms. If you want to prune it at all. I've never pruned my oak leaf. Okay, so let's talk about the Hydrangea paniculatas. These are your limelights, your big bends, your phantoms. These bloom in the summer, so they bloom on new wood. What does that mean? New wood means that during the growing season, April, May, June, it sets the bud on that new growth for that season. So when would you prune these? Well, again, you don't have to. I've got several varieties of the paniculatas. I never prune. But if you do, you prune these in late winter or early spring. Just look at the varieties that you have. And here's the other variety, Hydrangea arborescens. This is what they call the smooth variety. This is a beautiful, beautiful hydrangea. The Annabelle is a typical example of this. Invincible. There is another one called Incredible that I just got involved with this year. It's really a beautiful plant. Blooms on new wood. Here's a hydrangea that's called a climbing hydrangea. I've not had good luck with this, but I wanted to show you the variety of it. Blooms on old wood, and you really don't need to prune this. I had one of these, and I just never could get it to bloom. All right, here's some resources for you. I'm going to leave this slide up just a minute. The master gardeners in Cobb County are here to help the homeowner in a wide variety of horticultural questions. So here's some good publications for you. Here is the phone number as well as the email you can use. I'd like to thank you for listening to this program. I hope you enjoy your time landscaping, whether it's a stress-free day or just go out with a cup of coffee. And I also challenge you, even if you're not a garden expert or you don't really like to garden yourself, the information that we have put together will give you the knowledge to make sure the people you are hiring are doing it correctly. And I think that's what the master gardeners love to do, is to give you correct information. Just because you find something on the internet does not mean that it's true. You have a great day, and thank you for joining us.